The night shift at Mason Tower started at 10 and ended at 6, and in the 18 months I had worked it, I could count on one hand the number of times I had seen the building's owner in the flesh. Brad Mason was the kind of man who existed in the periphery of ordinary people's lives. His name on a brass plate by the elevator, his face occasionally on the financial news playing from someone's office television, his silhouette glimpsed through the glass of the 42nd floor penthouse suite when the lights burned late. He was not a man who acknowledged the overnight security guard stationed at the lobby desk. He was not a man who learned the names of the people who held the building together while the rest of the world slept, or so I had believed. My name is Tony David, and for 6 months I carried a secret that grew heavier with every passing week, a secret I tucked beneath the loose cut of my uniform jacket, a secret that fluttered and kicked against my ribs in the quiet hours before dawn when the marble lobby was empty and the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the soft rhythm of my own breathing. For 6 months I sat behind my desk, checked badges, monitored the cameras, signed off on delivery logs, and pretended that the world was exactly what it appeared to be. I was 27 years old. I was an Omega in a city that had stopped making official distinctions between designations decades ago. In a building where nobody knew what I was because I wore suppressants and kept to myself and had never once given anyone a reason to look at me too closely. And then, on a night in the deep throat of February, everything unraveled. But I should start at the beginning. I owe myself that much honesty. I became a security guard because it was steady work, it paid enough to cover rent in a decent part of the city, and the night shift suited my nature. Omegas, even those of us who medicated our biology into something manageable, tended toward quieter rhythms. I liked the stillness of buildings after midnight. I liked the way the city lights smeared gold and amber across the lobby floor through the tall glass facade. I liked the solitude. Mason Tower was a 60-story mixed-use building in the commercial heart of the city. Floors 2 through 38 housed offices ranging from law firms to tech startups. Floors 39 through 41 were residential units occupied by executives and high-income renters. And floor 42 was the penthouse, reserved entirely for Bradley Mason and whatever segment of his private life he chose to conduct there. The ground floor was lobby, security, building management offices, a coffee kiosk that opened at 6:30, and my desk. I had worked there 8 months before I met Brad Mason properly. It happened on a Thursday at 11:47 at night. I know, because I checked the log afterward, the way you always check the log after something happens that rearranges the furniture of your understanding. He had come down from the penthouse in the service elevator, which was unusual. He was in dark trousers and an untucked shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked like a man who had been working for too many consecutive hours and had finally surrendered to the need for fresh air. He came to my desk. "Is the side door still alarmed after 11?" His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need to announce itself. Yes, I found my own voice without stumbling over it, which surprised me. "The exterior alarm activates at 11. You'd need to use the main entrance." He looked at the main entrance, the tall revolving glass doors that faced the street, lit up and visible to passing traffic. Something in his expression suggested that was not what he wanted. "Is there a problem with the main entrance?" I asked. "There are photographers outside." A pause. "I'd rather not." This was not covered in the standard security protocols. I thought about it for a moment, then pulled up the side door configuration on my monitor. "I can temporarily suspend the alarm on the service bay exit on the east side. It logs to the system, but it won't trigger an alert. You'd come back through the same way. I can set a window. 30 minutes?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, with dark eyes that held something calibrating and precise. "An hour." "An hour," I agreed, and entered the override. He was back in 53 minutes, and he stopped at my desk again. "Thank you." He set a folded bill on the edge of the counter. I had not been raised to refuse a tip graciously, but something about the gesture made me want to push it back. "That's not necessary. It's my job." "Your job is to sit at that desk and check badges." "My job is to ensure the security and comfort of this building's occupants. You occupy the building." I slid the bill back across the counter. "Good night, Mr. Mason." He looked at the bill. He looked at me. A faint crease appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the cousin of one. He picked up the bill and walked back to the elevator. I told myself that was that. I told myself it was a minor exchange, a moment of professional service, nothing more. I was, as it turned out, wrong. He started coming down at night. Not every night, Not even every week at first, but perhaps once a fortnight, usually after midnight, he would appear at my desk, sometimes with a purpose, needing access to something or asking about a building matter, and sometimes apparently without any purpose at all, simply standing at the counter with his second coffee of the evening and talking. He asked my name on the third visit. Tony David, I told him. How long have you worked here, Tony? 8 months. Do you like it? The question surprised me enough that I answered honestly. I like the quiet. Something in his expression shifted. I know what you mean. From a man whose name was on buildings across the city, who moved through the world surrounded by assistants and advisors and cameras, I found that admission unexpectedly human. It softened something in me that I had kept fairly rigid by design. We talked about the city, about architecture, about books. He was, beneath the reputation and the profile, a man who read voraciously and thought carefully and had strong opinions about the design of public spaces. I was not uninterested in any of those things. The conversation stretched from 10 minutes to 40, and somewhere in the space between November and December, I stopped approaching them with professional detachment and started approaching them with something warmer and considerably more dangerous. I knew what he was, an alpha, not in any aggressive or domineering sense, but in the quiet, insipid, deeply personal conflict. Gravitational way of someone whose presence reorganized the air in a room. Even through my suppressants, I could feel it, that low-frequency awareness of proximity that in Omega's biology never entirely surrendered to medication. I kept that awareness contained. I was professional. I was careful. Then came the night of the building's annual contractor appreciation event, held in the lobby and the adjacent function room, which meant my shift that evening was occupied with sign-ins and security coordination from 7 to midnight. The event wound down. The caterers packed up. I processed the final sign-outs, and the lobby quieted to its usual nighttime hush. Brad appeared at the desk at 12:20, and there was something different in him that evening. Looser, not drunk, I never saw him drunk, but released from some tension he usually carried. He had spoken at the event, I gathered from the scraps of conversation that drifted past my desk. Public performance, even for someone as composed as he was, cost something. Long evening, he said, for both of us. I closed the final sign-out log. You didn't attend any of it. I was working, right? He was quiet for a moment. Do you ever get a break during these extended shifts? I take 15 minutes at 9 and 15 at midnight. You took your midnight break at 11:40 because the caterers needed help with the service entrance code. I looked up from my monitor. You noticed that? I notice a lot. He held my gaze in that steady, unhurried way he had. Come upstairs for a drink when your shift ends. It's the least I can do. Every reasonable instinct I possessed lined up to say no. Instead, I heard myself say, my shift ends at 2. I'll be awake. I went upstairs at 2:15, and I did not leave until 5:45, and what happened in those hours was the most honest and the most reckless thing I had done in my adult life. I don't intend to narrate those hours as though they were simply physical. They were not. There was something in the way Brad Mason spoke to me, asking about my life before this city, about my family, about what I wanted from the years ahead of me, that made me feel simultaneously seen and terrified because I was not accustomed to being the subject of that quality of attention. He listened the way some people read, fully, without distraction, committing things to memory. I told him I was in Omega near the end of the evening, when the sky outside the penthouse windows was beginning to pale. I said it plainly, not as a confession, but as a fact, because he had shared truths with me that night that I suspected he rarely shared, and it seemed dishonest to withhold the basic architecture of who I was. He was quiet for a moment. Then, does that change anything about tonight, for you? No, I said, which was honest. Does it change anything for you? No, he said, which I believed. I left before the sun was fully up. I took the service elevator, which struck me as appropriate and also slightly absurd. When I reached the lobby, the morning security guard was arriving. I signed out, changed out of my uniform in the back office, and walked home through the early city with the feeling of a person who had just done something they could not undo, and who was not entirely sure they wanted to. We did not speak about it afterward. This is not as cruel as it sounds. He traveled extensively in December and January, 3 countries in 6 weeks. His itinerary occasionally visible through the glass of the building management office when his assistant communicated schedule changes for lobby coordination. When he was in the city, he came down to the desk perhaps twice, and both conversations were brief and pleasant and carefully surface level. as though we had agreed without negotiating it that the professional distance was a kindness to both of us. I told myself this was fine. I told myself that what had happened between us was exactly what it appeared to be, a single night, meaningful in the moment, complete in itself, and that I was a grown person who could hold that without needing it to be something more. And then, 6 weeks after that night, I took a test in the single occupancy bathroom on my lunch break, and I sat on the closed lid of the toilet for a long time, staring at a result that rewrote the entire map of my foreseeable future. Omega male pregnancy was not impossible. It was not even particularly rare. The medical literature described it in clear, clinical terms. The secondary reproductive anatomy, present in approximately 40% of male omegas, activated under specific hormonal conditions, typically during a heat cycle. I had been on suppressants for 4 years. The suppressants had suppressed my heats. But suppression, my doctor informed me at my appointment the following week, was not 100% effective, and some omegas experienced what was called a partial heat, brief, mild, easily mistaken for a bout of fatigue or a hormonal fluctuation. I had thought, in retrospect, that the week before the contractor event had been unusually difficult. Heavier than usual tiredness, a low-grade sensitivity to smell. I had attributed it to overwork. I sat in the examination room and listened to my doctor explain my options in that careful, non-judgmental way of good medical professionals. And I thought about Brad Mason on the 42nd floor, and I thought about my own life, and I made a decision. I was keeping the pregnancy. The second decision, the one I am less proud of, the one I would undo if I could step backward in time and reason with my frightened younger self, was that I was not going to tell Brad Mason. I constructed the logic for this in the way that frightened people construct bad logic, carefully, from materials that were individually reasonable, assembled into an architecture that looked sound until you applied pressure to it. He was a powerful man. I was a night shift security guard in his building. We had spent one evening together. I did not know what that had meant to him. I did not want to be the person who complicated his life with a consequence he had not planned for, who showed up at his door with a claim he might deny or dispute, or worse, accommodate out of obligation. I had seen in my own family's history what obligation without love looked like in a household. I did not want that for my child. So I said nothing. I requested a uniform adjustment, larger jacket, the reason logged as personal preference, and I spoke to my supervisor about transitioning to lighter desk duties for health reasons, citing a back problem, which was not entirely untrue given the growing curvature of my spine under the pregnancy's weight. I wore a compression band under my clothes that helped with the silhouette during early months. I declined invitations to after-shift gatherings. I managed. The human body, I discovered, has a remarkable capacity for being managed, right up until it isn't. If you have never carried a secret of that particular magnitude, you might imagine it as a constant state of anxiety, a persistent high alert, every interaction a potential unmasking. It was not like that. There were large stretches of those 6 months that were simply life. The routines of work, the physicality of a body doing what bodies do, the small private rituals I developed around the pregnancy that became their own kind of world. I started talking to him. My son, I eventually understood from the anatomy scan I scheduled at a clinic on the other side of the city. In the quiet hours of the lobby, not out loud, internally, in the way you hold a conversation with yourself when the building is empty and the city outside is deep in its nighttime silence. I narrated things to him. The way the light changed on the marble floor between 2 and 3 in the morning, the names of the regular occupants as they came through on late evenings, the architecture of the lobby, which I had developed opinions about. I read. I had always read, but pregnancy gave me a particular appetite for stories about people who survived complicated circumstances. Not inspirational stories in the self-help sense, but novels, histories, narratives of people who found themselves in situations they had not chosen and built something worth having from the materials available. I gained weight in the careful, managed way of someone who knows they are being watched. The compression garment helped through the 4th month. By the 5th, it was less effective, and I began to rely more heavily on the cut of my jacket and the nature of the desk, seated, partially obscured, the counter between me and anyone who approached. Brad Mason did not come down during that period. This was, I told myself, fortunate, and also at 2 and 3 in the morning when the building creaked and the boy kicked against my palm, and the loneliness of the whole arrangement pressed down with its full weight. I told myself other things, that I had been right to say nothing, that he would not have wanted to know, that I was sufficient for this. I almost believed it, most of the time. The sixth month arrived in February, the same month that had started everything 14 months before, and I was 30 weeks along, and I was tired in a way that had stopped being manageable and had become structural. Woven into the fabric of everything, a heaviness in my joints and my back and behind my eyes that no amount of sleep in the daytime fully addressed. I had made an appointment with my doctor for the following week to discuss my options regarding the final stretch of the pregnancy and my work schedule. I had a plan. The plan involved transferring to a day shift desk role at a different building in the company's portfolio for the last month, using a cover story about a family situation, and taking my parental leave without ever having disclosed the pregnancy to my employer at Mason Tower. It was not a perfect plan. It was the plan I had. And then, on the 15th of February, at 3 in the morning, the plan met reality, and reality won without breaking a sweat. The pain started at 1:47. I noted the time because I was logging a routine external camera check when the first cramp rolled through me, low and broad, nothing like the Braxton Hicks contractions I had been experiencing for the past 2 weeks, but something deeper and more purposeful that made my hand pause over the keyboard. I breathed through it. It passed. I continued the camera check. At 2:12 it came again, longer this time, and accompanied by a backache that was sudden and severe and made me grip the edge of the desk until my knuckles ached. It was too early. 30 weeks was too early. I knew this. I also knew, with a particular clarity that comes when the body overrides the mind's carefully maintained denial, that what was happening in my body was not something I could breathe through and continue ignoring. I leaned back in my chair and pressed my hand flat against the side of my abdomen, where the movement had been most active over the past days, and felt him shift and push back against my palm. And the sharp edge of fear in my chest took on a different quality. Not the fear of exposure, which I had been managing for 6 months, but the fear of a parent whose child might be in danger. I pulled up the building medical emergency protocol on my screen. I was supposed to call emergency services and my supervisor simultaneously. I started reaching for my phone. The elevator doors opened. I had not heard it coming. The night elevators were quiet, but I should have registered the indicator light on the lobby panel. I always registered the indicator light. I had been otherwise occupied. Brad Mason walked across the lobby at 3 in the morning in the dark wool coat he wore when he ran in cold weather, which meant he had been outside, which meant he had come through the main entrance, which meant he had walked past my desk on his way to the elevator, and I had been folded forward over the desk, with my arm pressed against my abdomen. He stopped. I watched him take in what he was looking at with the particular expression of a person whose understanding is being reconstructed in real time. The way his eyes moved from my face to the posture of my body to the very obvious reality of my silhouette, which the loose uniform jacket could not, in this moment of physical distress and forward bent posture, adequately conceal. The silence lasted 3 seconds. It felt architectural. Tony. His voice was different from how I had ever heard it, stripped of its usual composure, not loud, but immediate and raw. He was already crossing the lobby toward my desk. Tony, what's happening? I'm fine. The words were automatic and completely unconvincing. You are not fine. You're... He stopped at the counter. He looked at me fully, and I watched him finish the sentence he hadn't spoken aloud. I watched his face move through something complicated and land somewhere intent and present. How far along? There was no point in the performance anymore. 30 weeks. 30 weeks. A breath. When did the pain start? Just under an hour ago. It's coming in intervals. I was surprised by how steady my voice was, given that my hands were not steady. I was about to call emergency services. Give me the phone. I can call Tony. He said my name again in that stripped-down voice, and there was something in it that moved past my defenses without encountering any resistance at all. Give me the phone, or pick it up and dial, and I will stand here and not touch it, I promise. But please do one or the other right now. I picked up the phone and dialed. He stood at the counter while I talked to the emergency operator, giving the building address, describing my symptoms, confirming I was stable and seated. When the operator asked if I was alone, I looked across the counter at Brad Mason, who had not moved. No, I said. Someone is with me. The operator confirmed response was en route and instructed me to remain calm and seated. I ended the call. 12 minutes, I told him. Okay. He moved around the end of the counter. I tensed, but he stopped at a reasonable distance and crouched down slightly, so we were closer to eye level, which meant he was not looming over me, which I recognized was deliberate. Is the pain bad right now? It's manageable. Another cramp was building at the lower edges of my awareness, and I breathed through the front of it carefully. It might be preterm labor, or it might be a false alarm. Either way, they'll want to. I stopped, breathed, continued. They'll want to monitor. Either way is fine, he said calmly. Either way, you go to the hospital and you're monitored, and everything gets handled. It's not your problem to handle. Something crossed his face, not anger. I was prepared for anger, had been preparing for it in the abstract for 6 months, but something quieter and considerably more complex. He was quiet for a moment. Whose is it? The question was gentle. It was not an accusation. I looked at him. In the nighttime lobby, with the amber city lights smearing through the glass and the pale overhead security lighting casting everything in its flat, functional glow, Brad Mason looked very much like a man who had just had something important returned to him that he had not known was missing. Yours, I said. I know I should have told you. I know. The cramp hit its peak and I closed my eyes and breathed, and when I opened them, he was closer, not touching me but close, present in the way of someone who has placed themselves within reach and is waiting for permission. I'm sorry. We don't have to do this right now. His voice was even, careful. Right now we get you to the hospital. You don't have to come. He looked at me with an expression that I filed away in some deep part of my memory to examine later when I had the bandwidth. I'm going to come, he said, if that's all right. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes and were professional and kind and admirably unfazable in the way of emergency responders who have encountered every variety of human emergency. The taller one helped me from my chair with practiced efficiency. The other took my information. I gave them the name of my prenatal clinic and the attending physician. Brad Mason stood at a distance during all of this, giving the paramedic space, not inserting himself. I noticed this. I noticed most things about him, in the way you notice things about a person when your particular biology is attuned to them, even through medication, even through the managed distance of 14 months. In the ambulance, one of the paramedics asked if the man who had accompanied me from the building was my partner. I said, he's, and stopped, and there was a half second in which I truly did not know what word to use. From the jump seat where he had settled without asking, Brad said quietly, yes. The paramedic nodded and continued her assessment. I did not look at Brad. I stared at the ceiling of the ambulance and breathed carefully and let the city pass outside the windows. At the hospital, I was taken for assessment immediately. Brad was directed to a waiting area with the brisk efficiency of hospital staff who have protocols about who accompanies patients to examination rooms and who does not. He accepted this without argument. As they wheeled me away, I glanced back once, and he was already seated in the waiting area, elbows on his knees, watching me go with an expression of focused calm that I recognized, by then, as what he looked like when he was containing something large. The examination determined that I was experiencing preterm labor, contractions regular and purposeful, but that my son was not in immediate distress. The attending obstetrician, a brisk, warm woman who did not remark on the unusual nature of my presentation, explained that they would administer medication to slow or stop the contractions, monitor both of us through the night and into the day, and assess from there. 30 weeks was early, but not critically so. With intervention, they expected to hold the pregnancy longer. I lay in the hospital bed with the monitors attached and the IV running and the soft beeping of equipment providing its own particular kind of company, and I thought about Brad Mason in the waiting room. When a nurse came to check my stats 2 hours later, I asked if my visitor was still in the waiting area. The man in the dark coat? She checked something on her tablet. Still there. You want me to send him in? If he's willing. He was willing. He came in quietly and pulled the visitor chair close to the bed and sat in it. He looked at the monitors, at the IV line, at my face. They're managing it, I told him. They think they can hold the labor off for at least several more weeks. Good. His voice was low and the room's quiet. And you're not in pain? They gave me something. It's better. He nodded. His hands were folded in his lap, and he was looking at me with an attention that I found simultaneously difficult and necessary to hold. Why didn't you tell me? It was not quite a question. I had been composing the answer to this for 6 months in the rehearsal theater of my own head, running through versions of it at 2 and 3 in the morning in the lobby below his apartment, and now that the moment was here, none of the rehearsed versions seemed adequate. Because I didn't know what you'd want, I said finally, honestly, and I didn't want you to do something you didn't want out of a sense of obligation. That seemed worse than handling it on my own. That seemed worse, he repeated slowly. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you made a significant decision on my behalf without consulting me. His voice was not sharp. That somehow made it harder. Based on an assumption about what I'd want. Yes, that assumption was wrong. The monitors beeped. Down the hall, a cart moved. I looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. I know, I said quietly. I know that now. What changed? Tonight, I mean, before I came in. What were you going to do? Call emergency services. Manage it. By yourself? I've been managing it by myself for 6 months. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger at me, I understood. Or not only that. Something more complex. I've been in this building, he said. I've been 42 floors above you, and you were? He stopped. Started again. I would have wanted to know, Tony. I want that to be clear. I would have wanted to know from the beginning. Do you understand why I'd want to know? I looked at him carefully. The waiting room had not softened his clothing. He was still in his running coat, the collar slightly turned up, looking like a man who had gone out for a run at some ungodly hour and ended up somewhere that mattered considerably more. His eyes were the same as they had always been. Dark, steady, giving very little away except to someone who had spent the better part of a year and a half learning to read them. Tell me, I said. He looked at the window for a moment. The city was out there beyond the glass, doing what it always did. That night, he said, in November. I know we didn't talk about it afterward. I know I handled that badly. I was traveling and I told myself you wouldn't want the complication, which was me doing exactly what you did. Making an assumption about what the other person needed without asking. A beat. But that night was not nothing to me. And the 14 months before it weren't nothing. You're not nothing, Tony. The monitors beeped. My son shifted against my palm. I didn't know that, I said. I know you didn't. That's also my failure. This was not a conversation I had scripted for any of my late-night rehearsals. The version of Brad Mason I had constructed in my head during 6 months of solitary pregnancy was composed primarily of assumptions that he would be annoyed or obligated or cold. I had not scripted this version. This man in a running coat sitting in a hospital chair at 4 a.m, accounting for his own failures with the same precision he apparently brought to everything else. I didn't know what to do with it. I was 30 weeks pregnant and hooked to 2 monitors and running on the adrenaline backwash of a medical emergency, and I didn't have the emotional resources to do anything with it except let it exist in the room. You should probably go, I said. It's almost 5 a.m. I'm going to stay until the morning team comes in and confirms everything is stable. You don't have to. I understand that I don't have to. He met my eyes. I want to, if that's all right. There was that phrase again, the same phrase from the lobby, from the ambulance by inference, now here in this room. If that's all right. It's all right, I said. He settled back into the chair. We sat in the soft beeping silence of the hospital room and watched the city outside the window begin, slowly and imperceptibly at first, and then all at once, to lighten. The medication worked. The contractions stopped by morning. I was monitored for 36 hours and discharged with a revised care plan, a prescription for modified bed rest, and strict instructions to cease the night shift until further notice. Brad drove me home. This had not been discussed or arranged. I came out of the discharge process to find him in the lobby of the maternity wing, still in the same dark coat, having apparently communicated with someone at some point because he had coffee. Actual coffee, not the hospital variety, and a paper bag that contained a breakfast item from a bakery that was not yet open at the hour he must have ordered it. I accepted both without commentary. We drove in comfortable silence through the early morning city, him at the wheel of an unremarkable black car that I understood was his preference for private movement, and me in the passenger seat with the coffee warming my hands and the strange, suspended feeling of someone who has been through a crisis and come out the other side into a landscape that looks familiar but isn't quite. He pulled up outside my building, a 6-story walk-up in a decent neighborhood, the kind of place that is not glamorous but is genuinely home, and kept the engine running. I'll call my assistant about a ground floor accommodation, he said. Something without stairs, for the next 2 months. That's not necessary. You're on the 3rd floor. I'm aware of what floor I'm on. He looked at me with the patience of a man who had decided not to argue, but was not going to pretend to agree. I have a property. It's been vacant. It's 1 floor, no stairs, 10 minutes from the hospital you were at last night. A pause. Consider it. I looked out the window at my building's facade. The 3rd floor window was mine. I could see the plant on the sill, a tough little succulent that had outlasted every other living thing I had attempted to keep alive in the apartment. I'll consider it, I said. I moved in 2 weeks later. This is not the capitulation it might appear to be. My doctor agreed that the stairs were a legitimate concern. The apartment Brad offered was genuinely pleasant. Ground floor, good light, a small private courtyard that I immediately found myself sitting in on mild days, drinking tea and reading. He did not install himself there. He did not appear frequently or make himself a fixture of my daily life in any intrusive way. He came twice in the first week, on both occasions bringing things I had mentioned needing: a particular brand of herbal tea, a pregnancy pillow that my doctor had recommended, and staying long enough to confirm that I was settled and comfortable. On his second visit, he sat in the courtyard with me for an hour and we talked the way we used to talk in the lobby, about books, about the city, about his recent travel. It was easy and careful, and there was something in it that felt like the rebuilding of something that had never entirely been built correctly in the first place. On his third visit, I asked him what he wanted from this situation. I needed to know. Not for my own vanity. I had put my vanity to one side the night the paramedics came, but because I had a child to think about, and clarity was more important now than it had ever been. He was quiet for a moment. We were in the courtyard again, and the afternoon was mild for February, and there were birds doing something purposeful in the tree at the far end of the space. I want to be here, he said carefully. I want to be present for the rest of this pregnancy, and present when your son is born, and present in his life afterward. I want that. He looked at me. And I want to know whether there is a possibility of something between us, or whether that is something you'd prefer to keep separate from the co-parenting arrangement. The directness was characteristic. I had always appreciated that about him. I spent 6 months making decisions about this situation without consulting you, I said. I don't think I have the right to make more unilateral decisions. That's not an answer. I know. I looked at the courtyard tree. I spent 14 months watching you come and go from that building, and telling myself the professional boundary was the right one to maintain. And then I spent 6 months telling myself I was protecting you from an obligation you wouldn't want. Both of those stories were about what I thought was best for you, and neither of them asked what I actually wanted. I paused. What I want is you, if you're genuinely willing. Not as an obligation, as a choice. He was quiet for long enough that I began to construct a dignified acceptance of having misjudged the moment, and then he said, I came down to that lobby the first night, because you sent my tip back. I looked at him. I had been in that building for 2 years, he continued, and no one had ever returned anything I gave them. Everyone either wanted something from me or wanted me not to need anything from them. You just sent the money back because it wasn't necessary and went back to your work. He looked at the tree. I came back because I wanted to see if the second conversation would be as surprising as the first. Was it? Every single one of them, he said simply. The birds concluded their business in the tree. The afternoon continued. Then it's a choice, I said. From both of us. Love, when you come to it sideways and late, after a long period of circling and self-protection, has a different quality than you might expect. It is less like a door opening, and more like the gradual realization that you have been standing inside a room for some time without noticing the walls. Brad learned the language of my pregnancy with the same methodical attentiveness he apparently brought to everything. He came to my prenatal appointments, not all of them, because his schedule was what it was, and I didn't require it, but enough that the staff at the clinic began to recognize him, and enough that when the obstetrician showed us the anatomy scan on the monitor, he was there beside me, watching the image with an expression that I would describe, if I were being precise, as undone. That's his hand, I told him, pointing to the image. He didn't answer for a moment. His jaw was set in the way I had come to recognize as his version of working through something that was affecting him more than he intended to show. His hand, he said finally, quietly. He's been pressing it against my side. I feel it most in the evenings. He looked at me. Does it hurt? No, I thought about the late-night lobby, the marble floor reflecting amber, the private conversations I had conducted with a child not yet born. It's company. Something shifted in his face. He reached across and took my hand in his, not dramatically, not with the deliberate weight of a declaration, simply with the careful naturalness of a person doing something that seems obvious. And we watched the rest of the scan together. This is the thing about the room you have been standing in without noticing. Once you stop pretending you are outside it, you find that the room has been furnished all along. He was a good man. He was complicated in the ways that intelligent, driven people with significant power and responsibility tend to be complicated. There were evenings when the weight of whatever he was managing showed in his silence, when the calls that came after midnight were clearly not the kind that went well. When the gap between the public version of Brad Mason and the one who sat in my courtyard was visible in the set of his shoulders. He was not without difficulty. I did not want him to be without difficulty. I wanted to know him, which meant knowing the difficult parts too. And he wanted to know me. This was the thing that I kept having to relearn, because 6 months of solitary management had calcified a certain habit of self-sufficiency in me, the reflex to deal with things before they became someone else's concern. Brad was patient with this habit, but not infinitely patient. He called it out, gently but directly, each time I caught myself retreating into it. "You're doing it again," he said one evening, when I had spent an hour trying to solve a logistics problem related to the birth plan on my own before mentioning it to him. "I'm aware. I'm not criticizing, I'm pointing out the pattern. There's a difference?" "Yes, criticism is about judgment. Pointing out the pattern is about," he paused, wanting to be let in. I looked at him across the small dining table of the courtyard apartment. He had brought dinner, Thai food from a restaurant I had mentioned in passing 2 weeks before, because he retained information like a well-organized archive, and we had been eating in the comfortable rhythm that had become our evening routine. "I don't know how to do this without managing," I said honestly. "I've been managing alone for a long time." "I know. No judgment in it. You're not alone anymore. Simple, not sentimental, just accurate." I pushed the logistics problem across the table, figuratively speaking, and we worked through it together, and it took 12 minutes rather than the hour I had spent going in circles. And afterward, I felt something ease in my chest that I hadn't realized was clenched. This is what it felt like every time I let the walls down, a particular quality of ease, of resource, like breathing with both lungs instead of one. My son was born in the last week of March, at 37 weeks, still technically early, but at a gestational age that the medical team described with genuine confidence as ready for the world. 12 hours of labor, which I will not dramatize because those who have been through it don't need it dramatized, and those who haven't would not be served by my account. Brad was there for all of it, which was not what I had planned but was what happened. Because when I called him at 2 in the morning to say it was beginning, he was in the city, and he was at the apartment within 20 minutes, and he did not leave. He was not the person I had been afraid he would be, not obligated, not performing, not distant. He was present in the full sense of the word, which I am learning to understand as one of the most significant things a person can offer. When they placed the boy in my arms, and the room contained the particular kind of quiet that follows the extraordinary, Brad was at my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. I looked down at my son, small and angry about his recent transition and possessed of a remarkable quantity of dark hair. And I thought about the night shift lobby and the amber light and the 6 months of solitary preparation. And I thought about how much of that time had been spent in unnecessary loneliness. And I thought about all of it without regret, because regret is not useful, and what mattered was the present moment. "Hey," I said to my son, who did not look like he agreed with the circumstances but was working through his position. Brad's hand settled on my shoulder. Not claiming anything, just there. "What are you going to name him?" His voice was quiet in that way it had when he was containing something large. I had thought about this for weeks. I had not told Brad what I was considering because I wanted to arrive at the decision myself before I made it something shared. He had not pushed for this information, had asked once lightly, early on, and when I said I was still deciding, had accepted that and not raised it again. "Elliot," I said. "I want to call him Elliot." A pause. "That's a good name." "Elliot Mason David," I said, which was the first time I had said it aloud, and which had an entirely different weight when spoken into the room where the person whose name was in it was standing at my shoulder. Brad was quiet for a moment. He moved around from my shoulder so he was at my side, where I could see his face. He looked at the boy I was holding, and then at me, and there was something in his expression that I cannot fully describe, not because I lacked the words, but because it was the kind of thing that words approximate rather than capture. "Yeah?" he said quietly, "if that's all right with you." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything else. "Yeah," he said again, differently, "more than all right." Elliot Mason David made his own position on this clear by going quiet at approximately that moment and opening his eyes for the first time, and looking at the two of us with the expression of someone assessing a situation he had not fully prepared for. "He looks like you," Brad said. "He has your jawline. He's 3 minutes old. He absolutely has your jawline." This was the first time we had made each other laugh in that particular room, and it broke something open in a good way, a releasing way. And Elliot's nurse came in at that point, and we moved through the practical matters of the next hour, with the slightly giddy competence of two people who have discovered that laughter is still available, even in the rooms where important things have happened. We did not do things the conventional way. I am not sure there is a conventional way for two people who spent 14 months in professional adjacency, and 1 night in honesty, and 6 months in complicated silence to arrive at the thing they are now arriving at. But whatever the conventional way is, we did not follow it. We were careful with each other. We moved at a pace that was determined by the reality of a newborn, and the reality of two people still learning the difference between what they had assumed about each other and what was actually true. Brad did not move into the courtyard apartment. I did not offer, and he did not ask, and this felt right for the season. He was present in the ways that mattered, at the 3 a.m. feedings, not because I asked him to be, but because he was awake anyway, and he was 5 minutes away, and he had made clear he wanted to be included. At the pediatric appointments, in the evenings, with dinner that continued to arrive from the restaurants I had mentioned in passing and had not expected him to remember. My mother visited in April. She was a woman of strong opinions, expressed without packaging, and I had not told her much about the situation beyond the essential facts, which meant that her first evening in the apartment overlapped with Brad's arrival, and the three of us ate dinner together in the courtyard in a dynamic that required, on my part, approximately the concentration of a complex diplomatic negotiation. My mother asked Brad, about 40 minutes in, what his intentions were. Brad answered without hesitation, looking at her with the direct steadiness he brought to everything. To be as present and useful as Tony will allow me to be, and to spend the time it takes to earn his trust properly. My mother absorbed this. She looked at me. She looked at Elliot, who was in the carrier on my chest, doing what he did at this hour, which was sleep with the thoroughness of someone who had somewhere to be in the morning. Good answer, she said, in a tone that meant she reserved judgment, but was not displeased. After dinner, after she had gone to bed in the apartment's second room, I sat with Brad in the courtyard in the mild spring night. Elliot was asleep in the house. The courtyard tree was doing its seasonal thing, pale green with new growth. She likes you, I said. She's assessing me. He smiled, fully, which he did infrequently, but which, when it happened, rearranged his face into something considerably warmer than the composed, calibrated version the world usually encountered. I had been collecting these moments for a long time, without, for a long time, allowing myself to name what I was doing. I meant what I said, he told me. The time it takes, there's no deadline. I know. I looked at the tree. I also know that I don't need as much time as I was prepared to need. I've been watching you with him. A pause. You're good with him. He's easy to be good with. He screamed for 40 minutes at 3 this morning. He was right to. He had a concern and he expressed it. I looked at him. He had gas. A legitimate concern. The laughter came again, easy and warm. Elliot stirred in the house, a soft sound, exploratory, rather than urgent, and I stood and went in, and when I came back out with him awake and alert and directing his still unfocused gaze at the spring evening, I sat down beside Brad, and we passed the boy between us in the natural, unremarkable way of people for whom this is already the shape of their world. In late April, on a Thursday evening, I went back to Mason Tower. Not to work. My leave still had several weeks remaining, and I had spoken to my supervisor about transitioning to a different schedule and role when I did return, something that would bring me home before midnight. But I went back to the building because I had left a personal item in the back office the night of the emergency, and because there was something I wanted to see. I took Elliot in the carrier. He was awake and doing what he did now when awake, observing. He was not yet old enough to know what he was looking at, but he looked at things with tremendous attention, as though cataloging. The evening security guard, a woman named Rita, who had covered my shifts occasionally, waved me through with the carrier and an enormous smile. He's beautiful, she said, leaning across to look at him. He's opinionated, I said, which was accurate. I retrieved my item from the back office and came back through the lobby. It was 7 in the evening, the building still busy, people moving through the turnstiles in that purposeful after-hours way. I stood for a moment at the edge of my old desk, occupied now by someone I recognized from the day shift, who nodded at me, and looked at the space. The marble floor, the amber light from the street, coming through the glass facade at its early evening angle, painting the lobby in gold. The high ceiling with its embedded panels. The desk where I had sat through hundreds of quiet nights, watching the city breathe. I thought about what it had been to be alone in this space at 3 in the morning, with a secret so large I had stopped being entirely able to see around it. I thought about the specific quality of that loneliness. Not harsh, not dramatic, but deep and self-sustaining, the kind that convinces you it is simply the weather of your life. I looked at Elliot, who was looking at the ceiling panels with the solemn concentration he brought to new visual phenomena. This is where it started, I told him, and where it nearly ended differently. He did not comment on this being 4 weeks old, but he turned his head and found my face, and the expression he directed at me had in it some quality of trust that was so complete and unguarded that I had to breathe carefully for a moment. The elevator indicator lit up, the doors opened. Brad came across the lobby with the purposeful stride of someone who has been looking for something and spotted it. And when he reached us, he looked at Elliot first and then at me in the way he did, child, then me, taking both in as the complete thing we had apparently become. I got your message. I thought I'd come down. I was just leaving. I'll walk out with you. We walked out through the main entrance, not the side door, not the service bay, the main entrance, through the revolving glass. Out into the spring evening, where the city was doing what it always did, and the last of the daylight was catching the glass of the building's facade and making it shine like something valuable. He took Elliot from the carrier, with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 4 weeks learning how, and settled him in the crook of his arm. Elliot accepted this with his usual assessment phase, followed by his usual verdict of acceptable. How was it? Brad asked, going back. Strange, I said honestly. Good strange, like seeing a place that was the whole world and understanding that it was always just a building. He considered this. Is that sad? No. I looked at the building's facade, the brass plate, the lobby visible through the glass. It means somewhere else is the whole world now. He looked at me with the expression I had filed away in the hospital at 4 in the morning and had been revisiting ever since, the one that said something complete. Yes, he said simply. We walked away from Mason Tower in the spring evening, the three of us, unhurried. This is the thing about secrets. They are a form of protection that transforms over time into a kind of cage, not built by malice, but by fear, and sustained by the conviction that disclosure will cost more than concealment. I thought, for 6 months, that I was protecting Brad Mason from an obligation. I was, in reality, protecting myself from the risk of being known fully and found insufficient. I was not insufficient. The room had been furnished all along. I just had to stop standing outside it. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.